Everything you believe to be is an illusion. Your name, your story, your memories, your desires, your beliefs. None of this is real in the way you imagine. You have been taught to think that there is a solid, fixed, unquestionable self. But that is a carefully crafted lie to keep you trapped in an endless cycle of ignorance and limitation. From the moment you were born, your mind was shaped to accept an artificial identity, programmed by your family, society, culture, and religion. You did not choose who you are. You were conditioned to believe you are someone. But what if I told you that this someone is nothing more than a mask, a temporary character in a much larger game? Helena Blavatsky, one of the most enigmatic and revolutionary occultists in history, unraveled this mystery over a century ago. In her monumental works, such as The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, she revealed that what we call identity is nothing more than an illusion of the ego, a distorted reflection of the true essence of being. Humanity lives blind, trapped in what she called the veil of Maya, a state of complete illusion where we take the false for the true and forget who we really are. And why has this truth been buried for centuries? Simple. Because discovering that your identity is an illusion means you can transcend any limitation. You are not your past. You are not your memories. You are not your body. You are none of what they told you you were. You are something infinitely greater. But there is a problem. This truth cannot be merely understood intellectually. It needs to be lived, experienced, assimilated in its entirety. And that is where the true path of awakening begins. If you continue here, you need to be prepared to question everything, because once you see the truth, there is no turning back. Welcome to Occultum Veritas. Since the moment you were born, you were taught to believe that there is a self separate from the rest of the universe, a unique, distinct individual with its own story and particular destiny. But if you stop for a moment and really question, what defines this self? Your name? You didn't choose it. Your beliefs? They were programmed by the society you grew up in. Your memories? They are distorted fragments of the past, shaped by your emotions and your state of consciousness at the moment of recall. So, if you are not your name, your beliefs, your memories, or even your body, what exactly remains? Most people never stop to confront this question. They spend their entire lives within the prison of identity, defending this artificial construct as if it were real, trying to reinforce the story they tell about themselves, as if this narrative were all that they are. But is that true? Helena Blavatsky, one of the greatest occultists in history, was one of the first to expose this great illusion. She taught that what we call human identity is merely a mask, a hologram projected by the environment and the experiences we accumulate throughout life. But the real shock comes when we realize that this mask is not something natural. It has been imposed. From an early age, society conditions us to identify with a series of artificial concepts: nationality, gender, social class, status, religion. Each of these elements forms an invisible bond that keeps us trapped within a mental structure. Now think about this. If your identity were real, if there were a fixed and unchanging self, then why does it change? Who you were 10 years ago is not the same person you are today. Your opinions have changed, your tastes have changed, your way of thinking has changed. What does that mean? That identity is not solid. It is fluid, mutable, and it changes according to circumstances. So if this self that you believe you are is just a temporary idea, who is the observer behind this change? Who perceives the transformation happening? Ancient occult and philosophical teachings point to the same answer. There is something beyond the illusory identity, something that cannot be altered by time, experiences, or social programming. Blavatsky called this essence the higher self, a level of consciousness beyond the ego, a pure perception that is not limited by a name or a personal story. The true being is not what you think you are. The true being does not need labels, does not need validation, cannot be trapped in concepts. It simply is. But here lies the problem. Most people never come to discover this truth. They are so attached to the illusion of identity that they do not even consider the possibility that it is a deception. In practice, it is like an actor who spends so much time playing a character that he begins to believe he is that character. He forgets who he really is and gets lost within the fiction. This is the state in which most of humanity finds itself. And this illusion is not accidental. There is a reason why society pushes this belief in a fixed identity. When you believe you are just your name, your story, and your body, you become controllable. You're led to follow a predetermined path, to seek external validation, to worry about status and social position. You become a slave to a system that feeds on your fear of losing what was never real to begin with. But if identity is an illusion, what exists beyond it? And more importantly, why has this truth been kept secret for so many centuries? The answer to this question is simple yet disturbing. The illusion of identity has been imposed because it prevents you from discovering what you truly are. Since time immemorial, this truth has been hidden by the religious, philosophical, and social systems that shape civilization. Because once you realize that your identity is a mental prison, you become uncontrollable. You become something that the hidden masters of the past called the initiate, one who has transcended the illusion of the ego and awakened to the greater truth. Helena Blavatsky knew this. In her works, she exposed how humanity lives, hypnotized by a distorted perception of itself. Individual identity is a trap because it makes us believe that we are separate, isolated beings, living a unique and fragmented experience. But this is not true. According to occult teachings, the true self is not a separate individual. It is part of a universal consciousness. What you think is you is merely a small fraction of something much greater, a temporary reflection of an infinite intelligence. Think of the ocean. Each wave that rises seems to be a separate entity, unique in its form and movement. But in the end, each wave is just a fleeting expression of the ocean itself. The same goes for consciousness. What you call I is just a fragment of the whole, a wave that will eventually return to the ocean from which it arose. This means that the separation between individuals is merely an illusion, a game of the mind. We are all manifestations of the same force, the same cosmic intelligence expressed in different ways. But human identity, this mask that is given to us from birth, makes us forget this. It makes us believe that we are alone, that we must compete with one another, that we need to prove our worth. And so, we spend our lives chasing something that can never be attained, because we are seeking outside for something that has always been within us. Blavatsky argued that personal identity is the greatest barrier to spiritual awakening. As long as you believe you are just an individual, with your own story and destiny, you will be trapped within the limitations of the ego. It is like living inside a dream without knowing you are dreaming. Everything you experience will seem solid, real, and absolute, until the moment you wake up and realize that none of it was what it seemed to be. But how do you awaken from this illusion? How do you cross the veil and see the truth? This is the path of occultism, the path that has been walked by mystics and sages of all ages. The answer does not lie in acquiring more intellectual knowledge, but rather in unlearning, in freeing yourself from the limiting beliefs that sustain identity, in observing the mind and realizing that your thoughts, emotions, and memories are merely transient events, not what you truly are. The question is, are you ready to abandon everything you believe you are and face the void that exists beyond identity? Because that is the only path to true freedom. The greatest fear of human beings is not death, it is not pain, nor loss. The greatest fear of human beings is losing their own identity. Because at the moment you realize that everything you believe to be is an illusion, the foundation of your existence crumbles. The ego despairs, tries to fight, tries to find justifications to continue existing. This is why most people prefer to live in illusion. They need to believe that they are someone. They need to cling to the idea that they are unique, special, that they have a name, a story, and a fixed purpose in existence. But this attachment to identity is exactly what keeps humanity in a perpetual state of suffering. From the moment you identify with a separate self, you also become vulnerable to everything that threatens that self. The fear of death arises from the illusion that there is something to lose. The fear of failure arises from the belief that you are what you have built. The fear of rejection stems from the idea that you need to be validated to exist. And this is where the trap closes. If you believe you are just an individual, then you are doomed to fight against time. You need to leave a legacy, be remembered, achieve something that proves your existence had meaning. You become a slave to the need to be someone. But if identity is an illusion, then all of this is a never-ending game. Nothing you do, no achievement, no recognition can give you what you are truly seeking. The truth about what you are. Helena Blavatsky warned that the illusion of identity was not just a perceptual error, it was a spiritual barrier. Attached to the ego, human beings become incapable of perceiving their own infinite nature. They reduce themselves to a small fraction of themselves, unable to access their true power. That is why ancient occult teachings have always emphasized the need to dissolve the ego. Because as long as the ego exists, the truth will remain hidden. But there is a problem. The ego does not want to be destroyed. It will do everything to stay alive. It will create new stories, new meanings, new justifications to continue existing. It will don new masks. It may even pretend to seek enlightenment, when in fact, it just wants to strengthen its own importance. This happens when people turn spirituality into yet another identity. I am a seeker. I am a master. I am someone who has discovered the truth. All of this is still the ego playing its game. True liberation does not happen when you become an enlightened being. True liberation happens when you realize that there was never a you to be enlightened in the first place. And this realization is frightening. It dissolves all certainties, all references, everything that seems safe. But it is also the only path to the truth. If you truly wish to know who you are, you must be ready to lose everything you believed you were. Are you ready for that? If you have made it this far, you have already realized that your identity is not as solid as you imagined. You have understood that your self is merely a collection of thoughts, memories, and conditioning programmed throughout your life. But knowing this intellectually is not enough. You need to experience this truth. You need to feel what it means to exist beyond identity. And this transition is not easy. The process of ego dissolution is one of the most feared and, at the same time, most liberating experiences a human being can face. It does not happen all at once, like a sudden event. It happens in layers. With each perception, a part of what you believe to be yourself dissolves. But for this, you need to be willing to confront the void, because that is exactly what exists beyond identity, a vast unknown. Helena Blavatsky described this process in the teachings of Theosophy, explaining that personal identity is not just an illusion, but a trap designed to keep consciousness fragmented. As long as you believe you are just a separate individual, you will be trapped in what she called the veil of Maya, the illusion that prevents the perception of truth. The goal of occult teachings is not to strengthen the ego, but to dissolve it so that the true self can emerge. But how to do this? How to break this mental prison and experience reality beyond identity? The first key is self-observation. Stop and observe your thoughts. Who is the observer behind them? If you can perceive thoughts happening, then you are not them. The same applies to your emotions, your beliefs, to everything you have learned to identify with. The simple act of observing already begins to create a separation between the ego and true consciousness. The second key is unlearning. Everything you believe about yourself has been taught to you. None of your certainties are truly yours. All have been absorbed from the environment in which you grew up. Unlearning means questioning each of them. Are you really your story? Are you really your opinions? What remains when all of this is left behind? The third key is surrendering to the unknown. The ego despairs in the face of the void because it cannot exist without references. But the void is not an enemy. It is the gateway to true freedom. The more you accept that there is nothing fixed to cling to, the closer you get to your true nature. And this is the scariest part, because if you truly follow this path to the end, nothing will remain of what you thought you were. And yet, in that nothingness, you will find everything. This is the paradox of liberation. By losing identity, you discover who you really are. You realize that you were never a separate individual. You have always been consciousness itself, manifesting through different forms. You were never born. You will never die. You are existence itself, experiencing itself. Few people are ready for this truth, and that is why it remains hidden. The ego fights to stay alive, and the world around you reinforces this illusion at every moment. But those who dare to go beyond the veil, those who choose to abandon the mask and cross the void, discover something that no system, no belief, and no manufactured identity can offer: absolute freedom. And when this liberation happens, something extraordinary occurs. The way you perceive reality changes completely. The shackles of the mind dissolve, and the world that once seemed solid begins to reveal itself as it truly is. But what happens after you awaken? What is it like to live without the illusion of identity? That is what we will explore in the next part. If identity is an illusion, then how can one free themselves from it? How can one break away from the character they believe they are and access the truth behind the veil? The answer lies in the oldest occult teachings of humanity. Great masters, from Blavatsky to Gurdjieff, from Buddha to Lao Tzu, have always pointed to the same path, the awakening of consciousness. But this is not an easy journey. On the contrary, it is a process of destruction. Not the destruction of the body, but the destruction of everything you believed yourself to be. Each layer of the ego that dissolves makes way for something greater. But for that, one must face what most people flee from their entire lives: the void. Helena Blavatsky taught that the human ego is nothing more than a temporary reflection, a beam of consciousness projected to live specific experiences. But this limited consciousness keeps us trapped in samsara, the endless cycle of rebirths, desires, and sufferings. The only way to escape this labyrinth is to recognize the illusion and dissolve it completely. The first step is deep self-observation. Stop and observe your thoughts, your reactions, your fears. Who is observing? Who notices these emotions arise and disappear? If you can observe them, then you are not them. This is the first sign that your identity is merely a transient phenomenon. The second step is to unlearn everything that has been imposed on you. You were not born with beliefs, fears, or limits. You absorbed them from your environment. Your mind was conditioned to accept a specific identity and defend it as if it were real. But when you begin to question this, something within you disintegrates. You realize that much of what you believe to be yours was never truly yours. And that is where the most critical moment of the journey arrives. Surrendering to the unknown. When the ego feels it is being dismantled, it panics. It tries to cling to whatever it can to survive. But this resistance is what prevents true liberation. You must let go. You must allow the old identity to die so that the truth can emerge. Blavatsky called this process the rebirth of the soul. The false identity must be destroyed for the true self to manifest. But few reach this point. Most give up beforehand, frightened by what they might find beyond the veil. Because once you pass through that door, there is no turning back. Reality will never be the same again. And what happens after you awaken? What remains when identity dissolves? That is what we will explore in the next part. So, what remains when you break the illusion? When the self you believed you were dissolves, what is left? The answer is as simple as it is overwhelming. Everything. When the illusory identity disappears, you do not become a meaningless void. On the contrary, you awaken to something that has always been there, but which the ego prevented you from perceiving. You experience a state of pure consciousness, where there is no separation between you and the universe. There is no longer a self distinct from everything around you. There is only existence manifesting without labels, without fear, without limits. The great spiritual masters have always spoken about this state of being. In Buddhism, it is called nirvana, the end of the illusion of individuality. In Hinduism, it is samadhi, the fusion with cosmic consciousness. In the occult tradition of Helena Blavatsky, it is the awakening of true essence, that which transcends the game of matter and reconnects with the primordial source. But this transition is not just a distant mystical experience. When you truly understand that your identity was merely a mental projection, your entire way of interacting with the world changes. Fear disappears. The need for external validation dissolves. The emotional ties that bound you to past sufferings lose their strength. Because now you know that you were never just a transient character. You are consciousness itself experiencing different forms of existence. Does this mean you stop suffering? That you become an enlightened and unshakable being? No. But it means that now you see reality for what it is. You can continue playing the game of life, but now knowing that it is just a game, and that changes everything. And this is where one of the greatest occult secrets comes in. Those who awaken from this illusion do not disappear from the world. On the contrary, they become the true architects of reality. When you are no longer bound to a limited identity, you gain power over the very experience. Your mind is no longer imprisoned by the beliefs and programming that once controlled you. You can now shape your reality according to the truth you have discovered. But few reach this point, because breaking the illusion means dying before death. It means letting go of everything that once seemed solid and diving into the unknown without guarantees. That is why only a few who have enough courage can cross this threshold. And when you cross, there is no turning back. But is that a loss? Or is it the greatest liberation a human being can experience? That is exactly what we will conclude. Breaking the illusion of identity is not just a change of perspective. It is an internal revolution that completely transforms the way you perceive existence. Once you cross this threshold, there is no turning back. You will never again be able to deceive yourself with the same stories. You will never again be a slave to the same mental shackles. What once seemed to be reality now reveals itself as a theater, a game where everyone acts, unaware that they are merely transient characters within something much greater. That is why this truth has been buried for centuries. Since ancient times, religions, systems of power, and ideologies have been constructed to keep you identified with your mask. Because a person who knows who they truly are cannot be manipulated. They do not need dogmas, external validation, or empty promises. They do not act out of fear, nor out of the need to fit in. They simply are. But reaching this point requires courage, because there are no shortcuts. There are no ready-made formulas. This path is not about believing in new ideas, nor adopting a new spiritual identity. On the contrary, it is a process of destruction. The ego must die before the true self can emerge. And most people are not willing to do that. They prefer to cling to the illusion because the truth is frightening. The unknown is frightening. And now, you need to make a choice. Will you continue to uphold the identity that was imposed on you? Will you continue living within the illusion, defending a self that was never real? Or are you ready to go beyond and face what exists behind the veil? If this video made sense to you, leave a comment below. I want to know how far this message reached. If something within you resonated, if this truth awakened something inside you, share your experience. And if you want to continue exploring the mysteries that have been hidden from humanity, subscribe to the channel, because this was just the surface. There is much more to be discovered, and we are just getting started.